Hey guys, Raiden here and welcome to my brand new Fire Emblem class guide series. The goal of these guides is to teach people to understand the ins and out of most classes within Fire Emblem. This guide is going to be mostly focused around Fire Emblem Fates, but I will be including a lot of info from the other games, making it worthwhile watching even if you're not playing Fates at the moment. So let's start with some of their strengths. Archers are the staple range physical damage combat class of Fire Emblem, using bows to combat enemies from afar, typically of those who cannot fight back. They are especially skilled at fighting flying units, as bows naturally deal a ton of extra damage to flyers, causing them to be their natural counters. They have decently high skill and speed in order to make up for their lack of strength, causing them to easily crit or double attack more often than not. On top of that, archers have a range of 2 on most of their bows, allowing them to attack 2 squares both horizontally and vertically, and 1 square diagonally. Archers do have quite a few weaknesses. So for the weaknesses section, I'm going to try not to compare them to other classes too much, but we'll get to that later. The general weaknesses of archers, aside from their low HP and defense, is their range dilemma. Since I just told you about them having a range of 2, you'd think, oh, that's fantastic, they can attack within 2 squares. Well, notice how I said they have a range to 2 and not 1 to 2. That's because they cannot attack units that are 1 space away, so if a unit engages an archer in melee combat, the young bowman will not be able to defend himself, causing the attacker to hit and the archer to fail to retaliate in any way. Sure, they have higher HP and defense in general compared to mages, so they'll probably survive 1 hit, but if 2 units or a single stronger unit engage your archer, you can consider it game over. Well, unless you're Shinon, he breaks the rules a little.
Can you see the sun is shining on me? It makes me feel so free, so alive. It makes me want to survive. And the sky, it makes me feel so...
Now let's get to skills. Archers only have a few skills in general. While they're not game-breaking, they definitely are useful. First up, we have skill plus 2, which does exactly what it says. It increases the user's skill stat by 2. Always nice to have a bit of extra skill. Next up, we have prescience, as I believe it's called, which causes hit rate and avoid to gain plus 15 in their stats when initiating a battle, allowing the user to have an advantage to choosing fight in a fight or flight situation. Lastly, we have quick draw, which increases the unit's damage by 4 when they initiate combat. Overall, that skill's really great, has no downside to it, so I can't see it not being positive in some way. But just take note, skill plus 2 is in both Fates and Awakening, but prescience belongs to Awakening and quick draw belongs exclusively to Fates. Next, let's talk about weapons. One of the upsides to archers is that they have a lot of variety in their weapon choice. Of course, they can only use bows, and in the case of Radiant Dawn, crossbows, but they all have such varied effects. For these examples, I will mostly be using the stats from Rekka no Ken. Oh, and before I start, let's distinguish the difference between a Yumi and a regular bow. Historically, there's not much difference. Yumi are Japanese short bows, and regular bows are equivalent to the standard European bow. Typically, Yumis were smaller and easier to draw, allowing for easier use on horseback, while the European bows were much heavier and typically more accurate, allowing for better siege defense and just archery in general. In the game, the only difference is that the base stats are different, and with Yumis, you get a plus 2 in resistance when you use them, so that's pretty nice. Let's start with the basic bronze bow. It's a bread and butter weapon with decent damage and a decent hit rate. Not much to say beyond there. It's always reliable, although I'd go up to iron if I were you. Next up is the longbow. The longbow is typically less damaging and less accurate than a normal bow, but has a range of 2 to 3. It's very useful in those tight situations in which you need to save another unit who may be in trouble. Lastly, we have the short bow. The short bow has some decent damage, great accuracy, and has a crit rate of 10% in most of the games it's featured in. And in Fire Emblem Fates, this weapon is called the mini bow and has a range of 1 instead of 2. The downside to the bow is its high weight is causing some attack speed difficulties, so that'll be a problem. Now we're going to go over some of the legendary bows within Fire Emblem. Legendary weapons are pretty much weapons that are unique in one game or another, and there's not anything like it, and they have some sort of huge history behind the weapon. So to start, I need to mention George's Parthia, Faval's Ichivol, or Ufel, depending on the translation. It just depends on which kind of translation you read of it, but it's either Ichivol or Ufel, I don't know too much beyond that. Jodl's Mergleis, Rheinfletch, Nidhogg, the Double Bow, Leonardo's Lugenschneid, let's ignore that one, Pursuer, and my favorite, Takami's Fujin Yumi. Now let's talk about some of the class promotions. So, this is kind of a weird one to do because typically throughout the history of this game, this class has one promotion, and even in the later games, its promotions switch around so much. The oldest and most classic promotion is the Sniper. Snipers are available in pretty much every single Fire Emblem game. Snipers are to archers what Swordmasters are to Myrmidons. To put it simply, snipers are better archers in every way, not only having higher defensive stats than the archer to create more survivability, but most of the time their critical hit rates are also on the higher end of the possible promotions, causing them to be a physical range powerhouse of the series. Some of the sniper's notable abilities are Sure Shot from Sacred Stones, causing a 100% hit rate. Yeah, that's pretty big. Deadeye from Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn. In Path of Radiance, Deadeye can double the accuracy of your shot and put the enemy to sleep. But in Radiant Dawn's case, it triples the damage and puts the enemy to sleep. A little overkill, but hey. Next up, we have Bow Fair from both Awakening and Fates, increasing strength with bows by 5. Always nice to have a little extra damage. And last but not least, we have Certain Blow from Fates, which increases hit rate by 40 when initiating battle. May not be as good as Sacred Stone's 100% hit rate, but in general, Sacred Stones is the easier game. The Archer's second promotion is oddly enough one of my favorite, if not my favorite unit type in all of Fire Emblem. This class is called the Bow Knight. I'm not going to go into the more advanced aspects of the Bow Knight because the Bow Knight is only a promotion for the Archer in Awakening. The Bow Knight is a mounted unit which can use both bows and swords. Doing decent damage with both bows and swords and having a speed of a mounted unit makes them really diverse. Problem being is that they're the weaker bowmen than snipers, and weaker than mounted units such as paladins or great knights in melee combat. I'll admit they're not for everyone, but for people like me, they're amazing. So Niles, how are you liking your promotion to Bow Knight? Oh, Corin, it is absolutely fantastic. Because of course, I love mounting. Niles, you're always such a joker. What about the ability to use one-handed swords in combat? It must be a great asset to be able to use melee weapons. Oh yes, but I am far too used to two-handed techniques. Okay, that's it. I'm done. Camilla, Niles is being weird again. The last promotion for the Archer on our list is the Kinshi Knight from Fire Emblem Fates Birthright. The Kinshi Knight at a base level is a flying version of the Bow Knight. They come from both Sky Knights and Archers, and are able to use both Yumi and Naginata. And as I discussed this before, Yumi is a bow and a Naginata is a lance or a spear. They also have the movement of a typical flying unit, which is amazing. They also gain the high resistance growths of Sky Knights. To top it off, Kinshi Knights have two very powerful skills. The first is called Amura Terasu. This skill recovers 20% HP to all allies within a 2-tile radius at the start of the user's turn. Now you can't tell me that one isn't useful. The other skill is called Air Superiority, which increases both hit rate and avoid by 30 when facing flying units. This can be an amazing skill because it increases the unit's overall threat to flying units when archers in general are already a flying unit's #1 counter. But for fighting some of those boss type flyers like Camilla, this skill is wonderful. This is also where their weaknesses begin. They share common low HP and defense that the Sky Knights have. On top of that, they are now weak to other archers. The worst case of this is when you run into other Kinshi Knights. Both of these units counter each other, so the only way to combat one another is by making sure either your first strike with the bow kills them, or you go into melee range to best them stat-wise with a lance. You kind of use a Kinshi Knight either by A, ferrying others across gaps and long distances, or B, to take out a mob of flying units before they even reach the target's destination. This slightly changes for Bow Knights, where A still applies, but you cannot fly over large gaps because, you're on a horse. And B also applies, it's just you're gonna kinda have to be more careful than a flying unit, because in general a mounted unit will probably be hit a lot more than a flying unit if not using impassable terrain. Now for my personal favorite archers from the Fire Emblem series. My personal favorite archer is Nemi, or Naimi, I'm not really sure how to pronounce that one. And I can't really even explain why I like her other than how she looks and her shy but takes initiative personality. My favorite sniper is a tie between Takumi and Shinon. The only reason I choose Takumi over Shinon is because I like Shinon for his growths, but not really his personality, while Takumi, I like them both and I love his legendary weapon. And my favorite Bow Knight is Promoted Niles. That's kind of a weird one to say, but honestly, in my Conquest campaign, Niles was the one carrying the campaign. Well, aside from God Effie, of course, but Niles was always there and could pretty much one-shot any unit. I was pleasantly surprised by how Niles turned out. Speaking, I'd never even really tried a Bow Knight before. But after I tried Niles, he became one of my favorite units in Conquest. And I had to go back to Awakening just to see if they were the same, Lastly, my favorite Kinshi Knight is Reina, because she is the only unit that starts out as a Kinshi Knight. Aside from that, I actually don't know much about her character. Now, if you remember correctly, at the beginning of the video, I said that archers are one of the most controversial units in Fire Emblem. Why is that? Well, every single unit in Fire Emblem has some sort of place. Mages can take down heavily armored units with no problem, and cavaliers can charge across the field and still do decent damage. The problem with archers in general is that almost everything they can do is covered better by another class. I'm gonna go into detail on that in a different episode, and maybe a different video in general, and just talk about why archers are considered to be so mediocre. And I personally really like using them on my team, and I usually have one in every single team in every game, minus FE7 and Awakening, but that's just how I played those games. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I plan to do more of these videos. If you have any suggestions or comments, please leave them below in the comment section. It could either help me improve this video or even just make me feel good inside, which honestly is the best key to wanting to make more videos. So, if you also liked the video, could you please leave a like on the like button? That would help me out a lot, and if you want to support my content in general, you could also subscribe. I don't really like asking that, but hey. Lastly, you can check out my Fire Emblem Path of Radiance playthrough if you click right there on the screen. There's a dumpster fire you can look at for a while, or if you want to look at my more popular series, The Witcher 3, click right there. Thank you, and have a wonderful day. Riding out.